Yeah, certainly. My name is Jane Connors. I'm currently the victims' rights advocate for victims of sexual exploitation and abuse by United Nations and related personnel. I work out of UN headquarters, and in terms of my past life, I have been various things. I've worked in the United Nations a long time. So at one point, I left the United Nations. I had a small stint with Amnesty International as their international advocacy director. And I spent my first career was in academia, and I worked in universities in Australia and the United Kingdom, and also taught abroad a lot, taught a lot in Asia, in Malaysia, Singapore, and also in Hong Kong. So that's my background. I also write, I keep writing, predominantly on the work I'm doing now, and human rights mechanisms and violence against women and violence against children. Just this post was created by the Secretary General himself, and that's very important to know. It wasn't created by member states, which is the usual way forward. The Secretary General wanted this advocate, and because he believed putting the victims' rights at the centre of our response and our prevention efforts would make a difference. I was very privileged to be appointed. I applied. I was asked to apply by various people. They said you should apply. I was not confident in applying, but I was very happy and very privileged to have been appointed. And I think because what I could bring to the post was a long history in human rights from very early on. I wrote my master's thesis on reporting child abuse, and that was many, many years ago. I wrote several manuals and books as a consultant for the United Nations on violence against women. I worked in human rights for many, many years. And then I also had a particular capacity to deal with the administrative and budgetary processes of the United Nations. And if you want somebody to set something up, it's very complicated, these budgetary and administrative processes. But I had to establish the office. I had to work to create the office, argue through the budgetary body. So I imagine my background and my knowledge and experience in doing those things made me was something that made me appointable, and I was, as I say, privileged, humbled to be appointed, and one never knows why one is, but there were events that occurred in 2014, again in the Central African Republic, so that what occurred and the level of accountability was more or less none. What occurred would not recur. So then the Secretary General, in response to that, came up with his strategy, which I spoke of, which was put forward in 2017. And as I say, the first element of that, the central element, the cross-cutting element, is placing the rights and dignity of victims at the centre. It was thought if there was someone to speak for the victims, look out for the victims, then there wouldn't be long failures to act. And hopefully that's the case, but it's still a work in progress. A lot has been done, and we can't policy processes, attempts to make sure everything's aligned across the system, approaches that improve the way investigations are carried out, approaches which seek to mitigate risks, approaches which seek to ensure that every UN personnel knows what the prohibited conduct is. And now a really big push to pivot that to ensure that all UN personnel know that this conduct is not only prohibited, but it has personal effects on the individuals. It has effects on their families, effects on their communities, effects on their countries, and leaves scars. Their lives, they're not necessarily devastated, but their lives are changed. They're often left with children. I think we've pivoted, and I think we can see some improvement, but much more has to be done, in particular to change our cultural approach to these issues. They're not scandals, they are really attacks upon the rights and dignity of victims. The progress I've seen since I've been appointed victims' rights advocate, people certainly, when I'm around, talk about putting victims' rights at the centre. So I think that's progress. We've seen more policy. We've seen more flexibility with regard to having somebody in investigations, for example, having somebody even investigations by member states, having support and assistance realised, having a focus on paternity claims, child support claims. I think there has been progress, but it's something we have to do together. Member states are very important in this work, as is civil society, academia, national human rights institutions. So we just need to keep moving. And I think 4 years is a short period of time in the life of the United Nations. So things will not change overnight. But there's much more of an acceptance that it's not only about the reputation of the organization, but about the harm, the wrongs that have been experienced by victims. Just to be clear, my role is to advocate for the victims of predominantly beneficiaries. I do get engaged in advocating for the rights of personnel of the UN itself. And that's in the context of sexual harassment. It's because I've got this title, people will come to me, they will want to speak to me. But the difficulties and challenges, there are many. I mean, this is a system-wide issue. There is often an idea that only uniformed personnel get engaged in this behavior. That's not the case. Humanitarians do, development personnel do. So that's one challenge. Actually, the whole stress on the reputation of the organization sometimes leads to an underappreciation of the importance of the rights and dignity of victims. So that is a big challenge. We have challenges with regard to legal frameworks, challenges with regard to cooperating with member states and states stepping up to the plate. So there are many challenges. The challenges with regard to men and boys, and this is a challenge with regard to women too, but certainly women and girls come forward more than men and boys do, as we don't have many reports of from men and boys of sexual exploitation and abuse, or indeed sexual harassment, which is sexual misconduct by one staff member against another staff member. So many challenges, but the whole idea is not to just stand still in the face of challenges, but to move on, continue to make it clear that someone is there, someone is harmed. It is not an issue of policy, training, things of that nature. We really have to step up for the people who have been harmed. Yeah, they always say this sort of thing. One of the things you have to think about is whether it would be possible to have a supranational and independent judicial entity having jurisdiction over all of the offences committed within the UN or by UN personnel. So far do not have an international human rights court. We have the International Criminal Court. But how would we actually create this supranational independent judicial entity? How would we provide that entity with jurisdiction over all the offences committed within the UN or by UN personnel? You can't just create it and say, look, this is a supranational independent judicial entity. There would have to be some buy-in from member states, just as in the case of the ICC. You would need to have an agreement, and in the case of the various tribunals that have existed, you would have to have an agreement from the membership that there should be such supranational and independent judicial entity, which would have jurisdiction over their nationals. And their nationals who are uniformed or civilian. And I'm not sure that that would be an easy thing to achieve. In fact, I'm pretty sure it would not be easy to achieve. So yes, this might be a solution, but is that a solution which is possible? In the meantime, and you're the people in the position where you can put forward a framework as to how to create that judicial entity. In the meantime, my view is that I work with what I have. It may have flaws, but I have what I have, and that's my job as the advocate for victims. I could at some stage later after this job, involve myself in an exploration of this sort. But I think at this point, I'm going to work with what I have and try to improve what I have. Yes, I always have advice. You just have to keep it. Generally, humanitarian law and humanitarian action students are very interested in being part of an international organization, either at headquarters or in the field. And one could think of a combination of that and trying to encourage states to finance junior professional officer posts. That's what they're called for, entry-level people who come. They don't enter, well, they're given an opportunity to see what the UN is like. And we've created job descriptions which have 1 year in the field and 1 year in headquarters. So if we have we've had some interest from member states, but if you wish to join the UN, I think one of the things that you might think about, or any international organization or in the field or at headquarters, you might think about the options that I suggested, that interning, if you wish to, with us or with someone like us, acting as an online volunteer, providing support as much as you can to whatever office that you wish to work with. There are often short-term opportunities and in the field at headquarters. So just keep your eye on what is available from the various groups that put out information. We have, of course, our UN website, which advertises jobs that are available. Never say to yourself that you don't qualify. Be confident. When I left Australia more or less in my late 20s, and I went to the United Kingdom because I wanted to see how it would be working outside the country that I more or less grew up in, not all the time, but and was educated in. And I remember I had a short-term job, and I wanted to stay. I was told by everybody I would never get a job. I had the wrong nationality. I didn't have a work permit, etc., etc., etc. So I listened to that and I thought, that's all very interesting, but it doesn't apply to me. And I applied for something like 124 jobs. And I only got one interview and I got that job. So that's, I think, the best advice I have. Just realize things can be a little complicated as you seek to enter a particular field. It can take a while, but have confidence in yourself. Obviously, keep up your substantive skills, your technical skills, and keep up the passion that led you to study humanitarian law and engage in humanitarian action.